Well, I do want to welcome you to volume 12, book 12 of the series of 21 books that we're doing. This is a two-volume set, and it's very fascinating in that, again, bear in mind, this was written in 1949. Our agenda here is on the page being displayed. We just did the opening ceremony. We will go through both volumes 1 and 2 of book 12. We'll share in the closing ceremony, and then there will follow a question and answer period. Chapter 1, serial lesson 125, the origin of the earth. And again, please note that this material was written in 1949 and does reflect the understanding of the day. It's interesting that the material by and large is accurate. However, the volume of knowledge has been greatly expanded into what we know. And some dates have changed in terms of the longevity of the earth, the different periods of time that various creatures existed, as well as the succession of different animals, plants being introduced in. We do each struggle with our understanding of self and others when we do not have a common structure of knowledge. And I think that's really the purpose of these serial lessons, particularly emphasized in book 12, is we want to have a common frame of reference. We want to be able to understand not only ourselves, not only our position in the world outside of self, but we want to know how to relate to these things in a positive and affirming manner. And this is one of the purposes of understanding this material, as will become, I think, more evident here in just a few minutes. There is one trap that I want to warn you of, and that is what Zane calls knowledge orthodoxy. That is that you know something based upon what you've learned or what you've experienced, but then that acquisition of learning stops. And you start to say, this is the way it is because this is the way it is. And one thing that we have learned, and Zane admonishes us to be careful of, is to make sure that we continue to learn. Now, that doesn't mean accept everything that comes down the road. We need to test and to try and to incorporate what is appropriate in information and knowledge of the time, so that we can broaden our perspectives and broaden our horizon. I guess I judge information in two senses. The first sense is, does it really add to the base of knowledge I have? Or conversely, does it detract from the base of knowledge? If something is a negative or a detraction, I will treat it with a much closer examination than if we're looking at those things that are really adding to the knowledge and are consistent with what we know. That does not mean that sometimes our whole perspective changes. The introduction of quantum physics is a prime example from Newtonian physics. That just turned right on its head the idea of Newtonian physics at certain levels. That does not mean that it canceled out. All it said is there's different applications for different situations. And I think we're going to continue to find that as scientific knowledge is expanded. These chapters and serial lessons in volume 1 are a summary. And you may say, wow, I haven't taken this stuff since biology or zoology in school. And you're right, you probably haven't. But again, the information has been significantly added to, but it's important to see one primary concept, and that is that there is an interrelationship between all life. Even in 1949, those interrelationships were very weak. Today, we're seeing more and more and more saying that everything that is from the air we breathe and all of the things that are contained within the air, the earth, the animals, the plants, every bit of existence interacts with other bits of existence. We're also finding that the meaning of life is a little different. and it continues to expand. And I want to, I put a reference down here, and this is a recent article, and I'd like to just bring it up real quick if I could, because it is a fascinating article that, again, is one worth taking a hard look at. Let me get that here. Let's see if we can share that. And that's the wrong screen. It must be this one. Where was it? All right. I'm going to do that. Nope. Back into this. I'm going to go over to not there, not there. There it is. Hopefully you can see this, the fungal mind, the evidence for mushroom intelligence. Now, we don't think of mushrooms as being classified as an intelligent entity. However, this article goes into pretty good detail on how mushrooms themselves exhibit the characteristics that are normally associated with what we'll call intelligent life, that they have the ability to behave and to make decisions and to reflect other complex behaviors that are normally associated with higher level life. Zane talks about this, not just, he begins to mention it in this, he also mentioned it in earlier books, and he will mention it even more later, that everything from the earth to all the creatures that inhabit it, both plant and animal, to all of the stars and all of everything outside of our earth are interrelated together. And that interrelationship, where science is finding, is becoming increased, and we're seeing more and more of that each time. So let me go ahead and go back to our presentation. I will put that before the end into the chat box so that you can see this. And that way you can have access to it and take a look at it at the appropriate time. This is very fascinating. And again, you read through the volume 1, you start thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm back in school. And yeah, you kind of are, but having a basic understanding of how all that works is really important. Also, that's basically chapters 1 through 6. Chapter 7, Serial Lesson 131, talks about the evolution of man and the evolution of intelligence. There are 3 ways to view how humankind, men and women, relate and interact with their environment. The first was a prehistoric view where humankind was subject to nature and that we were in essence beneath nature. The second is that where we are equal to nature, and the third is that we are above nature and dominate nature. The second perspective is one that is becoming the most commonly accepted now, that we are just a part of the environment. We are just another entity that exists within space and time. And that if we act as if we aren't, we take this at our own peril. An example of this right now, and this is being recorded in January of 2022 for those who are viewing this at a later time. Right now, we are going through a solar period where there is very little activity on our sun. It has created an environment where cosmic radiation is now streaming into and saturating the Earth. Either very high solar activity or very low solar activity has a negative impact upon life, particularly as we understand it as humans. The effect of that right now is for those people who are subject to electromagnetic influences such as cardiac or mental health this is a difficult period and has been for the last 2 days and will continue for at least another day, if not further. Being unaware of that, how an outside force of cosmic radiation can impact us, we then don't understand why we feel and act, or others may feel and act the way they do. We are so interrelated and interconnected with our environment and with everything that is around us. It becomes very vital that we begin to broaden our knowledge, our comprehension, and understanding of why we feel, why we act, or why others behave and our environment behaves in the manner that it does. And that's really the theme of this whole book and one of the reasons for it. A good representation of this is what they call the tree of life. If you look back and you look at how everything is like a large tree that's spreading out, all that really indicates is that there isn't that interrelationship back to the main trunk. That no one group of animals, of plants, or of other types of creation are superior or inferior, that they all have their place and they're all interrelated over a period of time. Now, the time frame itself is somewhat irrelevant. We know that, and this, because it keeps changing, it's pushed further back. There was evidence presented within the last 2 weeks that for modern mankind, in the form that we would recognize as human, actually was probably, they have found fossil evidence that would indicate about 300,000 years. Whereas before, it was something well shy of 100,000 years. So the historic record keeps being pushed back. And this also brings up something that has been talked about or just mentioned, just casually passing, in terms of Zane's and the material that we study, but is a part of the tradition, particularly of First Peoples. They're in New Mexico, in North and South America, in other parts of the world. And that is that mankind, humankind, has probably existed prior to our present age. The Hopi believe that we are on our 5th iteration. And that's also consistent with what the Inca teach. And that's what the people in Australia teach. And so there's these common stories in the common history that there were previous iterations of humankind that were wiped out or some catastrophic events happened. And so this may just be a great cycle. We don't know. But the bottom line is that there is a huge amount of interconnection between all these various species. In chapter 8, there is an explanation, serial lesson number 132, that Zane gives related back to the 7 colonies of Atlantis on page 142. The fascinating thing that I see about this is when you look at the diagram that is represented within the study material, just before page 142 there, is that these fall within a longitudinal band of approximately 15 degrees, maybe up to 20 degrees. Peru is the only outlier from that. Everything else is very, very close. And all these societies around the world seem to have evolved simultaneously. Now, does that mean that these were all from Atlantis? I don't know. That's obviously one theory. What it does point to is there must be some common roots, whatever that explanation is. And I think we will, in the future, hopefully learn more about that. This is when we get into the second part, and this is probably some of the most significant. You need to understand and have a working knowledge of the first volume but the second volume is where the meat lie. And it really starts out on page 5. He talks about the history and the meaning of religion. And I think the definition from page 5 is so significant. The use of non-physical means to find more satisfaction for the drive for nutrition, the drive for reproduction, and the drive for significance. That is such a different definition of the purpose of religion and the meaning and application of religion that I think that this is worth making note of and reflecting upon in your time of meditation. One of the ways that we derive that knowledge is, as he points out, is from personal experience and from intellectual and extrasensory perception, ESP. Now, the success of any endeavor, as I've noted here, is based on the use of these two aspects. The reason is they're not bound by the blind belief or reliance on emotion. They incorporate and make use of emotion, but it isn't led with emotion. And you may ask, well, what's the problem with being led by emotion or being driven by emotion? Many of the extremes that we find within a religious expression, both positive and negative, are those that are expressed in an emotional way that may or may not be fully supported intellectually, or, if you will, by those other three characteristics: the drive for nutrition, the drive for reproduction, the drive for significance. If you look at those and you back those up as a foundation for the use of emotion, you have a much more solid footing to move forward with. And that's why on page 11, when he talks about, the definition of when can a group, an individual, a society, a culture be free, it's only when we have the truth and we act upon it. Having knowledge without action is really of little value. The significance is when we step out and act in that information. The use of the gold and the silver key, the use of the way that we understand astrology, the way that we understand the tarot, and apply them helps make us free, because we see the alternatives before us and have remedies if we see things that are not to our liking, or are impediments that are in the road. We are not bound by just what is there. We have remedies to be able to take action and to truly be free. And I think that's probably some of the most significant items presented. On page 12 through 9 of the Green Book, if you're using the Green Book, the nice thing about this is that there's some excellent definitions that you may make use of. The isms, I'll call them, of naturalism, animism, fetishism, and totemism. And then they have evolved into hero cult and phallic worship. Now, spending some time looking at these, you start getting some fundamental definitions and frames of reference to be able to analyze not just ancient societies, but current cultures and societies that we're in. What is driving and motivating actions by certain peoples, politically, economically, socially, will fall not just within these 4, but really within these 6 definitions. And these 6 isms plus the 4 isms plus cult, hero cult, and phallic worship. It is uncanny how you can take a news article or watch the evening news, which I've kind of quit, but to take or watch the evening news and to make a classification by one of these 6 items. And it's uncanny how they align. I will not spend, because we could spend a whole hour looking at these alone and really taking them apart and understanding the weakness of each and the failings of each, but yet it is a part of the way, no matter how advanced humankind has become or is becoming or wants to become, that they're still subject to these, if you will, we'll call them primitive drives or emotional responses. He also then does a good review of religious belief systems. The heliocentric religions of Mesopotamia and Central and Latin America, page 24 through 26, and other first peoples. Most of those were based upon worship that were represented by the symbols of the sky, the sun, the moon, the various stories that came out of creating the zodiac. All of those were developed by heliocentric religions. And then you get into the religions of early history, of Greece and Egypt, of Rome, of Britain with the Druids, of the Middle East, and more. And this is where we then will evolve into our modern religions, which is really each group where we've got Christianity, Islam, Zoroastrianism. All of these are referenced, and the way that he frames them, which I think is really fascinating, is using the concept of enslavement. By using the idea of creation of a reward, eternal reward, and eternal punishment, to be able to, if you will, control and to subjugate people based upon the idea that if you don't behave in the way that I define that you should behave, that there's going to be a punishment that will continue into eternity. There's also, again, the hero cult classification where you have a prophet, you have a great leader, you have those that represent as a son of God in various religious groups, or in those that even decline to talk about eternity, such in Buddhism, which later evolved its own theology about an afterlife, though the Buddha himself would not. He was more concerned about the here and now. The only thing that you can take into the next phase of life is knowledge. Page 114. This is a profound concept in how that we structure the idea and the expression of a religious belief system. Now, this is the first introduction in chapter 7, serial lesson 139 of the Stellarian religion, or religion of the stars. It's based upon abilities, knowledge, character, and spirituality. And these are the characteristics we look to develop in the present life to carry forward into the next lives that we're going to be using, not as a reincarnation. Reincarnation is not taught within this framework. It's that our evolution continues on into next steps that will be explained later in later materials. But for now, just know that there is a step beyond where there's continuance. He also makes reference to a book, The Reach of the Mind by J.B. Rhine, that if you get a chance, if you ever see this book or pick it up, it is a lot of foundational material that you can make use of. All right, I know we have some questions related here. Okay. Did Zane talk about the giants, the old men of renown? The comments were from some of the others. I don't believe that that's been in the materials, and I do not remember a reference to it. Vega, Vanessa, others, Peg, do you remember any reference to that?
I do not. I remember seeing something on Lemuria, but I do not remember seeing anything about giants.
No. And this is where I think we could get into the possibility that there were other interpretations of humankind. Most of the ancient societies contain a flood narrative that wiped out the population, but we don't know the consistency of that population. So this is just some opportunity to begin to evaluate and understand what kind of foundation we're building. We're building a foundation where we increase our personal ability, we increase our personal knowledge, we certainly are building our character and our spirituality that carries forward. And these four aspects do carry forward, because these are, in Zane's interpretation, which I agree with, these are the interpretation of what makes us human. What are the ongoing characteristics that not only are we building to and that we want to maintain, but that we want to embellish upon. These are the lasting things and give us the abilities to not only understand ourselves, but to understand the world around us. And I'm pretty excited about that. It gives us a framework in which we can operate in. Any questions? Because this is pretty radical.
Got one question.
The ESP component. The ESP component was in a separate book where he talked about the value or the concerns about the different types of ESP. He made a reference to ESP. Oh gosh, in serial lesson 133, and it's in the first chapter. But the foundation was based on the earlier works that I don't have in front of me. Another question came back of what is meant by ability. What do you think?
The thing that comes to mind is skills, talents, things I'm good at, but I'm thinking maybe it's something more than that.
I think it's all encompassing. I believe you're correct.
Okay.
Abilities are both physical, emotional, intellectual. It's encompassing the building of skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that it is a very broad definition. And it is something that we have the ability to enhance. Would be if we are enhancing a skill set, we're enhancing our ability. So taking classes, reading books, I believe even meditating upon and accessing interplane wisdom and seeking wisdom increases our abilities, if you will, as a class, as a whole. Peg, what do you think?
Oh, I totally agree. I was actually going to respond. It's our skills.
Okay.
And, or Mike says something that one is able to do well.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really pretty cool. It's everything that we endeavor to do in this particular lifetime is really we take with us.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And this is the development of our spiritual body.
Mm.
These are the components. And Pete, I think you're right. You know, you test. Zane was adamant that you base what you know on experience that you can try and test. Now, can you do that with everything? No. So some things you're going to have to accept because other people have experienced it. But that should be as limited as possible, and you should have as broad of an experience as you can, which is challenging. So this is why we emphasize the tarot. This is why we emphasize how to construct a chart for astrology. Unless you do it, you don't experience it. And only by experience it can you say, is this valid for you? And are these people telling what you understand to be the truth? Yeah. Because this is the first time that he has really pulled it all together. And you'll see more and more about this. But again, the core of the teachings, 129 to 134 in serial, it's chapter 7, serial lesson 139. Man is influenced by both the inner and the outer plane. We are admonished to understand the inner plane's influence on objects, on the world. We're also the influence and the importance, I might add, of thoughts. And then the moral implication of all the above. What is one of our mandates as to how we are to act and to serve? It's in the closing ceremony. Who remembers?
To contribute your utmost to cosmic welfare.
Yeah. To do good. To make a positive impact.
Right.
We are challenged, we are admonished, we are instructed that we are not to withhold these gifts, this information, but that we are to apply it to the world around us. Now, that's not being obnoxious. That's not going out and telling people what they should do or what they should believe or how they should act. But again, inserting in a way that makes a difference. Sometimes that's by volunteering. Sometimes that's by speaking a point or making a compliment, or by taking action that makes a positive change. So these reflect the core teachings of the Church of Light and provide a pathway for life in this existence. The failure to take into consideration that there is an inner plane as well as an outer plane is where too many people are in their life. They are just kind of bouncing around like a pinball off the bumpers and not realizing that they can have an influence, that they can have an impact, that they can alter, they can see the various possibilities and opportunities and challenges and optimize those if they take advantage of them. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't get that job done. I will lapse in that I will react rather than act, or be looking ahead to say, what are the possibilities? What are the potentials? Where can I make that insert? Yeah, book 6, very good. It is extremely important that we more and more look to the balance between inner and outer plane, rather being exclusively focused on the outer plane, or frankly, being exclusively focused on the inner plane. We need to live in the world, but to be a positive impact in that world. And I believe that this is the formula of how we can do it. Questions, thoughts, comments? Is this doable?
I think that's the everyday challenge, right, Alan?
I am challenged by it.
I am challenged by it, but I, if I could just remember that that's what I got to do is balance those two. It's very empowering.
You say it in a good way, remembering too, because I often forget.
Yeah, me too.
I become a victim of emotional response rather than perspective. I'm teaching a sociology course right now, and it is great because I get to apply all of our principles within the course, because it's all about perspective and looking at culture and societies and their impact on the individual, and it is profound.
That sounds cool.
Individual decisions are as much or more the unseen, unspoken culture
Yes.
than they are what a person may feel is their own decision. They really isn't really their own decision. They were so heavily influenced. And I believe that we have now the ability to open our eyes and not be that victim of our culture or our society. Thoughts, comments?
Got a comment from Omari.
Oh. I see the outer world as an expression of the inner world co-created, focusing on manifestations through and not identify the cause of those manifestations can lead one to the inner world influences the outer world in a profound way, but often we do not see it or we do not utilize it to optimize it,
Right.
not for our personal gain. And that's the other thing that is one of the tenets of the Church of Light. We don't charge for our classes. Other organizations, other groups charge lots of money. But this is to teach people to become really not just self-sufficient, but to be a part of the system in a positive way and to bring positive change.
Right. Alan, if you take a look at Omari's comment, very right on point, came before Brian.
Yep, personal alchemy. Absolutely.
Right.
And
So-
Pete has his hands up, Alan. His
Okay,
hand
go
up.
ahead. Pete?
Yeah, I was just raising my hand to comment when we were talking about the cosmic good. And I was just thinking, sometimes when I meditate and I get caught up in just, in the here and the right now, right? My work, my relationships, my friends, whatever I got going on, and my city, my state. And when you really get into meditation, you start thinking about it. It's like you think about the world, and then okay, well, what about other planets around this world? So we have to be in unity as humanity, to contribute not only to ourselves or just to human beings, but to plants and to nature, to the rocks, to keep the universe, the atmosphere, because our planet is affecting other planets.
Of course. And affecting us. And I mean,
Right.
it's
Just like other planets are affecting us.
right.
So we have to take care of our environment for the whole universe, for other universes.
And the only
It's a whole
thing we
lot
can
different
do
thing.
is the personal responsibility to act in a responsible way.
Right.
That if you read that article about how fungus or mushrooms in this sense, how they respond and how they act, it's almost a little frightening to think that there is that level of intelligence and very basic, which Zane tells us it was, and now science is finally catching up. Then how are we to interact with them? How are we to co-support? How are we to gain from that interaction from them?
Right.
Or with any other elements of nature or creation? And I think it just raises, I don't have an answer to that. I think that's a philosophical, that's a meditate on this, and how do you live your life to be consistent with that everything has intelligence, that everything has power, and that we want to do what promotes the well-being of all. And I just think that's very profound.
It really is, and now that you mentioned it, it's kind of funny because the other day I was watching this TikTok video and this guy was hooking up this instrument, these clamps, and they had this instrument to mushrooms, and it would make music.
Yep.
And I'll be kind of thinking about it like everything is vibrating. So maybe this instrument is picking up the vibrations. I'm not too sure if I was able to believe it, because it's TikTok, but just the knowledge that I have that everything vibrates, and maybe this instrument is picking up the vibrations of these mushrooms, and it's playing a sound. And if that's working, then these mushrooms are actually playing music. They're in harmony with each other.
Here is that article. I'm going to put it in the chat. I think I've got it here. Yeah. There's the article on the mushrooms. And I don't use mushrooms just to say that they're the be all and end all. It's just an example of the possibilities and the interaction of other elements of creation.
Well, yeah, Alan, it's mycorrhiza. It's the soil web.
Yeah.
And if there are any gardeners out there who are interested in their soil health, that's actually been a topic among gardeners for a while. But I think what they have found, or early experiments have found, is that the web actually communicates.
Yeah. It's interesting. Science fiction has written about this for years.
Yeah, Sherry Tepper is a sci-fi author that wrote about that in one of her sci-fi books.
Yeah, and in the interrelatedness of things, one of the reason that there's a new telescope that was launched, the Webb telescope, that's kind of to replace several others that are out there. And one of the things they're finding is that cosmic dust seems to act as an interconnecting web between all of the stars, the planets, all the different elements of space. And it seems to have some level of communication that they don't understand. I understand it. I get it, because this is what this is all about. And this is part of the deal of the interconnectedness of everything that's around us.
Can I just throw one comment in there that Alan,
Please.
since we're talking about it, there's actually a Netflix documentary for those of you that use Netflix, Fantastic Fungi, it's called, by a gentleman that I've been following for a few years, Paul Stamets.
Yes.
So, it's somewhat off topic to what we're talking about in a way, but directly to the network of mycelium. There's no better explanation than watching that documentary.
And I've seen it. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
There was a comment about meditation. And yes, there are some hints, but I don't believe, and I don't remember, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a recommended methodology. There may be a presumption that we know what meditation is and how to do it. But I don't believe within the Church of Light that there is a recommended process or procedure for that.
Only through the award manuscripts do we
Yes.
do any kind of explaining of that.
And even it is not extensive.
No.
And so during the conference, I'm going to talk about that. One of the things of how I focus and use meditation, and some of the instruments that I use to extend the vibratory response, and the use of feeling ESP in a positive way. So there's all kinds of different avenues that this branches out into. And I think that's the point of all this, is that this is not just a limited scope of information, that it is a very broad, very deep, deep and wide base of knowledge. And it's something that in one lifetime cannot be even the surface scratched. That it is a process through our evolution as beings that we gain more knowledge. One of the things that, and we'll close on this, is that we're going to talk in future books more about the next life and why we need to build up all these attributes. And I think the ultimate thing is that we are evolving and we are continuing to have purpose beyond this existence. Mm-hmm. And we'll touch more on that later. But this is the precursor to say that your life and time here is important, and it is something that will be leveraged on beyond the existence in this life. And with that, let's go ahead and move to the closing ceremonies. And then I'm going to have to depart here and go to my class, but I'll try to come back if I'm able to get through earlier. So Vega, would you share in the closing ceremony, please?
I certainly will. Thank you, Alan, for a wonderful class as always. Eternal brothers and sisters, we are now about to close a Church of Light meeting in the customary manner. And in so doing, let us consider seriously the kind of life it is fitting a brother and a sister of the light should live. We must each leave this meeting to go about our daily duties, but unless we take with us some higher thought and nobler purpose, we have spent our time here in vain. For knowledge lacking goodness leads to naught but self-undoing. Each brother and sister has pledged himself or herself to put forth an effort to alleviate physical and mental suffering, to dispel ignorance, and to spread truth. Therefore, even as we would be helped by those of our religion who are more enlightened, let us make every effort to assist others and let each so conduct himself or herself to be an example of moral purity, radiating life, light, and love upon the world of their endeavors. And I will pronounce the benediction. O thou eternal spirit in whom we live, move, breathe, and have our being. Dismiss us now with thy blessings, and as we travel along our several ways, let ministers of thine guard our footsteps and light our pathway, that we may not stumble in our blindness. From our hearts, we thank those who have assisted in our researches, and now as we depart, we consecrate our efforts to the cause of truth and beneficence. So shall it be.
So shall it be.
Thank you so much, everyone. I will shut